Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the session on how to master full stack development presented by the IEEE student branch of the University of Moratuwa. We'll be starting shortly, so please stay with us. And I'd also like to kindly request everyone to please keep their microphones muted to avoid any background noise. Once again, a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be an insightful and engaging session. Now, let me introduce you to our speaker for the day. He's a proud alumnus of the Faculty of Information Technology at the University of Moratuwa, and he currently works as a software engineer at Padelbuddy. Beyond his professional role, he is also a visiting instructor at the Faculty of Information Technology of the University of Moratuwa, sharing his vast knowledge and experience with the next generation of IT professionals. It's truly an honor to have him here with us today. So please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Rukshan J. Senanayaka. Mr. Rukshan will guide us through today's session on how to master full stack development, sharing invaluable insights and practical expertise. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. Please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Rukshan J. Senanayaka to the spotlight as he guides us through the session. Over to you, Mr. Rukshan.
Thank you very much, Pravisha. Good evening, a very good evening to every one of you. And I thank the IEEE student branch of University of Moratuwa for giving me this opportunity to share my experience and knowledge with you guys who are entering the world of full stack development. And I hope I can deliver on the promises that the IEEE student branch is expecting out of me. So again, thanks for inviting me. Let me share the screen and we can go into the session. Okay. Right. So I hope you guys can see my screen. And today, what we are going to discuss is about how can we master the craft of full stack development? Why do I call it like that? It's because with the modern day and age, there's a lot of areas and domains where technology plays pivotal roles. And in any domain or sector, we know that web applications, mobile applications, or backend applications, anyhow, there is some sort of a computing system that is involved in these technologies or domains. And when it comes to the majority of these use cases and applications, what we can find is there's always some place where a web application is functioning. And in order to enter the world of work as professionals and skillful engineers, we need to have this skill set and the craftsmanship. And in this session, what I hope to give you guys who are yet to venture into the world of full stack development is a guidance or an approach so you can go on your own and find the ways where you can specialize and become skillful and talented in order to thrive in this competitive field. Right. So, first thing, this will be highly biased and highly opinionated because I'm sharing my experience and my thoughts. So, it's up to you to decide which things should you follow as is and which things should you explore a little bit more, maybe online or maybe from other tutors. It's totally up to you. But I guarantee at the end of this session, you'll have a clear idea on how to approach this one. Okay. So I'm Rukshan Senanayaka. I currently work as a software engineer at Padelbuddy, which is a startup, an Australian startup. And they are specializing in developing products that are solving different business use cases by applying artificial intelligence and full stack development practices as well. So I recently graduated from University of Moratuwa, and also I have a diploma in software engineering, and I have been coding enthusiastically for around 10 plus years, and I have a couple of years of industry experience as well. And also I am working on Upwork as a freelancer in my free time, and you can visit me at rukshanj.me for how to connect with me. Okay, so back to the interesting stuff. In today's session, we'll discuss only these things. So I'm not going to overwhelm you guys. I'm not going to give you a lot of detail. I'm not going to bore you guys with technical details at all. We only discuss these specific points, and at the end of this discussion, you will be confident enough to get started with full stack development. So the first thing is we're going to get an introduction to full stack development. What is it? I don't expect you to have any idea of full stack development. Without any idea, you can stay on the session, and by the end of this session, you'll have a good guidance on how to pursue further. And also let's talk a bit about the traditional fundamentals. Now, why do I call them traditional fundamentals? We know in the modern day and age, AI or artificial intelligence has been on the boom. So everywhere you see it's AI that, AI this. So there's a lot of tooling available. Now, when these tools are developed or made available to you publicly, as a software engineer or a software developer or even an undergraduate, you don't need to follow the traditional steps that we had been following for 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Because now we are in the 21st century, and even in that, we are in the AI boom. So I'll tell you how to be competitive and how to face these new AI developments as a full stack developer or someone who learns full stack development as well. And we have a couple of demos. So I'll break down the complexity of full stack development to you. So you might be having, okay, full stack development is very hard. I don't know where to start. React, Angular, Vue, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I don't know where to even begin. So you might be thinking like that. But I guarantee I will break that misconception at the end of this session. And the other one, we'll have a Q&A. And also I will tell you exactly how to get started today, right after this session. You don't need to wait until tomorrow. You don't need to wait 2 hours. Right after this session, you can have your first step in becoming a full stack developer or an engineer. Right. Before I get into any specifics of full stack development, I just want to give you this mentality. This mentality is very, very, very important if you're going to learn a new skill. Not only full stack development in general, but in general, you have to have this mentality. So I'm going to tell you this in singular also, just I want to convey. Sometimes when we start to learn something, we might think, අයියෝ මට නම් ඒක තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ. අයියෝ මට නම් මේවා තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ. මුකුත්ම තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ. I can't understand anything. Like that way, you might be thinking you are not good enough to get started in full stack development. But the reality is, when you, I think most of you guys are undergraduates from universities, and it doesn't matter even if you're not. So when you're working with a group of undergraduates or a group of friends in your university, in your clubs or in your classes, you might be thinking, okay, that person knows more React than me. That person knows more Java than me. That person is really skilled in responsive web development than me. මට වඩා අරයට ගොඩක් පුළුවන්, මට වඩා මෙයාට ගොඩක් පුළුවන්, මට නම් Java එච්චර බෑ. Like that way, we might be having so many judgments about ourselves when we are comparing with the other peers within our groups. But the reality is, they might not know what you know. So you can see the diagram. This orange color is what you know, what I know. And the gray area is what you think others know. But in reality, others may not know what you know. අනිත් කට්ටිය ඔයා දන්න සමහර දේවල් දන්නේ නැහැ. එහින්දා හිතන්න එපා අයියෝ මට බෑ අනිත් හැමෝටම පුළුවන්. So this mentality you should get rid of first. Because I have worked with so many seniors, so many juniors during my university life, and also some mentors as well. Now, what I realized is, no matter how hard you study, no matter how hard you practice this craftsmanship when it comes to IT or computer science, there's always going to be something that you don't know. No matter if you're the batch top, no matter if you have straight A's in all the subjects, no matter if you get so many freelancing projects, always there's going to be someone better than you, depending on what metric you're going to compare yourself against. So don't think like that. Don't compare to anybody else. Just know you are at point A and you have to get to point B. That's same for the full stack development journey. So that mentality, just have it there first. And when it comes to full stack development, there's a lot of buzzwords. There is JavaScript, HTML, CSS, data structures, algorithms, Python scripting, APIs, MERN stack, mean stack, MVC, MVVM. You know, there's a lot of words. But the good thing is, you don't need to worry about all these words. These are just buzzwords. These buzzwords means nothing when it comes to having an actual skill set that you require to thrive in the full stack development world. Because if you chase these buzzwords, if you chase the newest, latest JavaScript framework, you'll be chasing it forever. Because JavaScript is a developing language, it is not done and dusted. New libraries are created every day. New packages are being added every day. So if you're focusing on those frameworks, languages, or buzzwords, you are going to get lost. That is the wrong approach in learning full stack development. So I'm going to tell you the right approach. What is the right approach? The right approach is to understand the fundamentals on which this full stack development is built upon. So let me ask you a question. I'm sure you guys have used Wikipedia, and I'm sure you guys have used Facebook. But these two types of websites are fundamentally different in that one is a website, the other one is a web app. Now, clearly I have shown in the slides which one is a web app and which one is the website. Now, can you tell me in the chat? You know, you can chat for, I believe you guys can chat. I think if not, you can just message me. What is the difference between Wikipedia and Facebook when it comes to functionality? Why one is website, the other one is a web app? Can you? So I'm really interested in getting your ideas so I can help you guys understand these concepts very clearly. I don't know if you can use the chat. I hope you can. What is the difference between Wikipedia and Facebook? Yeah. So I got one answer. Wikipedia requires a browser. I mean, Facebook also requires a browser. So not that, but there is another fundamentally different thing. Okay, I think I got the answer. We can interact in each other in Facebook web app. Yes, I think that is very close to what I was expecting. Facebook is interactive. Facebook වල ඔයාට පුළුවන් ගිහලා interact කරන්න. කියන්නේ ඔයාට user කෙනෙක් විදිහට input දෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඔයාට output එකක් එනවා වගේම input දෙන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි Wikipedia වල ඔයාට එහෙම input එකක් දෙන්න පුළුවන් places තියෙනවා. නමුත් ඔයා ගොඩක් වෙලාවට ඒක කියවන එක තමයි කරන්නේ Wikipedia. So let me repeat that. So in Wikipedia, what you do is read. Only read most of the time. You don't put new details or you don't interact with other users. Those functionalities are still there, but not like Facebook. In Facebook, there's a lot of features. You can log in, sign up, send friend requests, and share memes. Like all this good stuff you can do on Facebook. So the fundamental difference between websites and web apps are websites are just information display. You can think like that. They're just static websites. You can just read through them like a blog, like a newsletter. You can just read through them. Right? So yeah, Wikipedia is kind of static and Facebook is dynamic. So that is the difference between a website and a web app. In a web app, it's an application. A user can interact. That is the most important distinction between a website and a web app. A web app is interactive. Users can do stuff with the web apps. Not much with websites. You can just read a website. You can just look at a website, but you can't just interact with it like you do with a web app. Another web app, Google Docs. Slack is a web app. Discord is a web app. Gmail is a web app. So like that way, there's a lot of web applications. And even if you're using Moodle, Moodle is a web app, right? So these are web applications which gives users the ability to interact with it. Now this full stack development we consider with web applications, not with websites. Because in web applications, we have these complex logics and we need to do some functionality. So everything is related with web applications. Okay. So how can we identify web app? In a web app, there's a backend and a front end. Now I know you guys are new to full stack development, so you might not even know what is a backend and what is a front end. Don't worry, we have the answer in the next slides. Right. Think of a restaurant. Don't think about web development, think of a restaurant. I'm sure you might have even seen the meme. The meme is, in a restaurant, when you go to dine in at a restaurant, you sit at a table and then there are waiters and there are also the kitchen with chefs. Now, when you want to order some food, you go through the menu and then you see, okay, I need pasta. And then you convey that order to the waiter and the waiter goes to the kitchen and informs the chef. The chef takes whatever food items are needed from the fridge and then cook it. And then the waiter brings them back to the table. So that is the usual restaurant procedure. And that is exactly the procedure happening in a full stack web app. Why do I say like that? So imagine Moodle. I'm getting the Moodle example because I'm sure most of you guys may be undergraduates. So when you log into Moodle, you can see the subjects that you are enrolled to. For example, you might be enrolled in a database module or fundamentals of programming. So when you click that card related to programming fundamentals module, you'll see the chapters. You'll see the assignments list. You'll see what activities are pending. Like those information you can see. Where are these information stored? They are stored on a database. So the information is stored in a database They are displayed on the browser via the Moodle app. So the Moodle app, we call it the front end. What we see is the front end. අපිට දකින part එක තමයි අපි front end එක කියලා කියන්නේ. නැත්නම් client එක කියලා කියන්නේ අපිට පේන්න තියෙන web app එක, browser එකේ පේන්න තියෙන part එක. The APIs the APIs are like a concept. You cannot see them, but they are what connecting the back end and the front end. They are like the waiter in a restaurant system. When you request the information for your Moodle subject in Moodle, the API will be getting the information from the database and display to you. So the API is the middleman. It's a waiter. Okay. So three main parts: the front end, API, and the back end. So the back end and the database, we almost always use them interchangeably, but back end is the actual brains of an application. Application එක මොලය තමයි back end එක කියන්නේ. පිටත තමයි front end එක කියන්නේ පේන කැලල. Database එකේ තමයි අපි data ටික store කරලා තියෙන්නේ. So front end, API, back end, and the database. So those are the main parts of a full stack app. Right? Even if you don't understand the full picture yet, don't worry. We have so many layers of information in this slide set. Okay. So when it comes to full stack, අපි මේකට full stack කියන හේතුව තමයි, there are so many components in a full stack applications, but the main parts are front end, back end, and the database. Three main parts: front end, back end, and the database. Sometimes we also call this three-tier architecture. Don't worry about the buzzwords like that. Just know there are three parts in a full stack app: front end, back end, and the database. Now, in a website that I mentioned earlier, like Wikipedia, you can assume it's only front end. You can assume it's only front end, right? In the case of Wikipedia itself, it's kind of blurry because it also has some login features. But for now, just think of Wikipedia as a blog. So it's just displaying information. So there's only a front end part. But when it comes to full stack application, a web app, there is front end, back end, and the database. Now, what is the front end? Like I said, it is everything the user sees and interacts with. User payන සහ user interact කරන part එකට තමයි අපි front end එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ. Now, the front end is the user interface, we call it almost always, and it's developed using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So these languages we use to create the front ends. Now, when we're actually doing this stuff, when it comes to industry or your university projects, we are not actually using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but we are using some frameworks like React, Angular, Vue. I will tell you the reason later on when I'm showing you the demo, but for now, just understand that is to make your processes easier. ලේසියෙන් වැඩේ කරගන්න තමයි මේ වගේ frameworks use කරන්නේ. ඇත්තටම framework නැතුව full stack app එකක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. So the only reason that we are using these frameworks is to make our processes as a developer much more easier. I will tell you why I say that in the next coming slides. So responsive design. Responsive design means you have to make your applications, mostly web applications, in a mobile responsive manner, because most of the people are using these applications on mobile devices. Sometimes your application might not have a separate mobile application. So users will be using the web app on their mobile device. Still, it has to be usable. So you have to think about responsive design. Responsive design means it works on your mobile, it should work on your tablet, it should work on your computer, desktop computer as well. Now, what is the backend? Like I said earlier, backend is the brains of a program or a web app. It's behind the scenes logic. What do I mean by behind the scenes logic? Let's take the Moodle scenario. You log into Moodle and you click the, let's say, fundamentals of programming module card. They are arranged cards. So you click that card. And once you click that card, Why does the information related with the fundamentals of programming subject displayed to you and not, let's say, graphic designing? දැන් ඔයා Moodle එකේ මේ බටන් එක ක්ලික් කරාම ඇයි ඔයාට හරියටම programming fundamentals වල content එකම පෙන්වන්නේ graphic design වගේ වෙන subject එකක content එකක් පෙන්වන්නේ නැතුව? How does the application know which subject module to show? That is because the backend is handling or processing that logic. So these kinds of important logic we write in the backend. So backend applications we can write using Python, Java, Node.js, PHP. Like these technologies we can use to write the backend applications. Remember, we only talked about two things here: front end, backend. Front end we can do with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Backend we can do with Python, Java, Node.js. Just think like that for now, right? And then the database. Database is all about storage, all about storing your data. Now, when your lecturer uploads a lecture recording or let's say activities or assignments to Moodle, you can see it at any time, right? Why can you see it at any time? Because they are stored in the database. So the database is where the data is stored. It's only concerned with data storage, like a fridge in the restaurant. So 3 parts: front-end, back-end, database. Still, if you don't know, if you don't understand, don't worry, let's keep going. Because I will be coming back to these slides to give you the full idea. So full stack development in one sentence: development of both client-side and server-side software. That's full stack development. Okay. What is full stack development? Development of both client-side and server-side software. So that is the entire application stack. So front end have HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Back end has Python, Node.js, Java. And databases may be MongoDB, MySQL, MS SQL Server, whatever. There can be so many databases. But the idea you should have is there are 3 main parts: front end, back end, and the database. And you can see these are some examples of the tooling or the technologies. You can see for the front end, we have this is HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And for the backend, we have Ruby, Python, Java, and other whole lot of stuff that I don't even know, and .NET. For database, there are MongoDB, MySQL, Postgres. And for DevOps, so DevOps is whole another story. Let's just keep it for now. But for DevOps, we have, AWS, GitLab, GitHub Actions. And for mobile development, there is Java, Kotlin, so many technologies, so many tooling. But you only need to know there is something called a front end. There is something called a back end. There is something called a database. And in order to connect all this, there is something called an API, or the weight of the restaurant, remember? Right. So again, I'm reiterating the same thing. Looks and brains of full stack. HTML and CSS is the looks. It is how your application looks. For example, when you log into the Zoom, you can see Zoom has a blue color icon. It has a black color window. It has some buttons. Like that way, it's a looks. It's how you see the application. Now, if you remember in the old days of Facebook, it was very different than what we have right now as Facebook. So that was because the looks of Facebook was different back then. So in order to change the look of a full stack application, you have to use HTML and CSS. Simple as that. And to change the functionality, you should use JavaScript. Okay. So you might be wondering, okay, so I should use JavaScript on the front end. I should use JavaScript on the back end. And where to use Python? It's like so many different stuff, right? I get you. I understand. These confusions I also had when I was learning full stack development. But I guarantee when you see the demos, it will be crystal clear to you. JavaScript is used both on the front end and the back end. I know it's confusing. Trust me, I know. JavaScript is used on the front end and the back end. But HTML and CSS, only on the front end. Okay. I will tell why JavaScript used in the backend and the front end as well. Okay, let's go. Now, I know this is you right now. You are thinking, okay, he's talking about JavaScript, he's talking about MySQL, Postgres, so many stuff. I know this is you right now. Don't worry, I know that. So, right now, let's go into the demo so it will be clear to you why I say so. So, this is a demo one that we're going to do today. This will be the most basic full stack app that I can think of. So, there will be a backend and a front end. So there will not be a back database per se, but it's still a full stack application. So I hope you can see my Visual Studio. So I'm going to make it bigger. And right now, what you need to focus on is this part. So this folder, it's called Basic Full Stack. And there are two folders, backend and frontend. Simple, right? So the front end and the backend, there are two okay, so you can see only um, this thing. Let me share the whole screen. Can you see my VS Code right now? Okay, cool. Right. So this is the VS Code that I have, and there is a folder called Basic Full Stack. So that's just the folder name that I use, and there is a backend folder and a front-end folder. Now, when it comes to industry practice, you will be having this front-end and backend on separate repositories or separate GitHub things. Let's call it for now. You might not even know what GitHub is at this point, but don't worry about that. Just know that the backend and the front end will be in separate places if you were to do this for real. But for ease of showing you, I just have them as two separate folders. So backend and the front end. Now, what did I say in the slide set? I said in the slide set that HTML and CSS is the looks of a full stack app. Now, you can see in the front end folder, forget about the backend folder for now. In the front end folder, there is HTML, index.html, index.css, index.js. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this CSS and the JS, and then I'm going to have an absolutely minimal HTML file. So the HTML file will not have this, just okay, just some div and hello world for IEEE SBUM. Okay, so this is a very simple HTML file. It has the doc type HTML. We have to do it for any HTML file, and then the lang, and then there's a head tag and the body tag. So head tag has some metadata, and then the body tag is what you actually see. So this is just basic HTML. Don't worry if you don't understand. Just know that this is the structure of an HTML file. And in HTML, we do have tags. So there is a opening tag, and then there's the closing tag for head. And then there's the opening tag for body, closing tag for body. Like that way, they're like existing in pairs, pair-wise. And then within those tags, you had to write your script. And so now we have a basic HTML file, just HTML. We didn't do anything else. We didn't do any JavaScript. We didn't do any CSS, just one single HTML file. And let's see what it looks like. Okay. So this is that HTML file. I just loaded into my browser, and I just reloaded my browser, and you can see it says hello world for IEEE SBUM. You can just have whatever you want, save it, and then refresh it. It displays. Simple, right? So this is an HTML file. So whatever you display here, it will be displayed on the web browser. Now, so that is HTML only. And remember our presentation. I said that looks and brains are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the looks are with HTML and CSS. In that also, the HTML will be giving the structure of the web app, how it should be displayed. For example, if you need to have some sort of a list. You can go with number 1 and then number 2, like that way. So it's a list, structured, right? And then if you need to have an unordered list, you can have that also. Item 1 and then item 2. Simple. Just structure is defined by HTML. HTML එකකින් දෙන්නේ front end එකේ structure එක. මේකට යට මේක තියෙන්න ඕන. මේකට යට මේක, like that way. You know, underneath this text, you should have this text, like that way. The structure of a web page is given by HTML. Okay, so how did I know where to put this? How did I know where to have this OL? What does OL mean? OL means ordered list. UL means unordered list. So how did I know that? මං කොහොමද ඒක දැනගත්තේ? That is by learning HTML specifically. How can you learn HTML specifically? You know, in HTML5, there are so many online blogs which states this stuff for you to learn. Just there's a handful of tags to learn. බොහොම සුළු ප්‍රමාණයක් මේ tags තියෙන්නේ. You can learn them, and once you learn them, you know how to pass these values as needed. Even if you need an image, you can do this. Okay. So I don't have an image right now, but this is the way you can add an image. And if you need to have a big title, you can have H1. Like that. That is the structure of your web page. And now let's give it some styling. How can you give it styling? The styling is given by the CSS. CSS will give you the ability to style your web apps. Even websites, this HTML CSS, even you use to create websites. Because why? The front end is common to web apps and websites, right? දෙකේම වාට බලන්න දෙයක් තියෙනවා, website එකක් වුණත් web app එකක් වුණත් you can see something. Now the thing that you can see, you structure using HTML and then you beautify using CSS. So let's see CSS. So you can create a new file called you can create a new file called index.css. The name doesn't really matter, but I'm just gonna name it that. And then I'm going to import that CSS file into our HTML. How can you import any CSS file into our HTML? It's by using this link tag. How did I know that? මං කොහොමද ඒක දැනගත්තේ? That is another tag that is documented in HTML. So when you learn HTML, you will know how to import a CSS file to HTML. It is using this link tag. And the href index.css, that is the name of the CSS file. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to style this. Let's say I want this hello world for IEEE SBUIM, this one to have some color. Background color red. So what I do is I add some identifier to this tag, to this whole thing. I added some identifier. And in the CSS, I'm just defining its background color to be red. And then when I go to here and I refresh, it's red. And if I want to do something else, let's say I want to change the color of this list to be green. So what I can do is I can have another one, and the background color, I can just say green and refresh it. It's green. Simple, right? That's front-end development. There's only HTML and CSS. Don't worry about React. Don't worry about Angular. Don't worry about Vue. Don't worry about whatever. Just know this is front-end development. You have HTML, you have CSS. That's it. That's front-end. No matter how complicated application you have, you can write the looks and the styling using HTML and CSS. Even if you want to code something like Gmail with the looks, you can do it using HTML and CSS. It will be complicated. You will take months or years. but it is possible. ඔයාලට Gmail වගේ app එකක් මේ පේන්න කියන්නේ look and feel එක ගන්න CSS HTML වලින් විතරක් ලියන්න පුළුවන්. ගොඩක් මාස ගණක් යයි, but possible. So that is the power of HTML and CSS. HTML gives the structure, CSS gives the styling. Now let's get to the functionality. So JavaScript. So let me re-enable this JavaScript file. And so now things get a little bit complicated. Now we are going to make this website that we had. You can't just have any interaction with it, right? So now what you want to do is make it into a web app. How can we do that? Now I said in a web app, we have to have a front end, back end, and a database. So database, since it's just for storing stuff, let's say we have to have a back end and a front end. Now, if you remember, I said HTML and CSS are for front end stuff only. HTML and CSS only front end world විතරයි. But for the back end and the front end both, we do need JavaScript in order to create a web app. Why? Because functionality is the thing that is handled by JavaScript. So there is functionality in the front end, and there is also functionality in the back end, right? So the first thing we need to have is a back end. Okay, so before we get into the index.js of the front end, let's collapse that folder and go into the backend stuff. Now we are going to create a backend application. So I just collapsed the folder front end, and now we're going to go to the backend folder. So in the backend folder, what I ran was, I just ran the command. Okay, I can show you. So let me create a directory. Let's call it test. And inside this one, what I just ran was npm init. So, when you run npm init, you'll have the package.json. What is this file? Where did npm come from? Let's go back to the slide. Here, you can see one requirement. I have specified one requirement for this full stack app. That is Node.js. What is Node.js? Node.js is an environment. It's not a programming language. Node.js is an environment or a runtime where we can run our applications on. Let me repeat that. Node.js is a runtime or an environment where we can run our JavaScript. Why do we need an environment? Because it is historical. In earlier days, JavaScript was used in browsers only. JavaScript run කරන්න ඉස්සර browser එකක්ම තියෙන්න ඕනේ. Then people identify the potential of JavaScript, and if we could run JavaScript outside of a browser, then we can do so many powerful stuff. Like that way, people identify the potential of JavaScript. So if you want to run JavaScript without a browser, you need somewhere to run that JavaScript, right? And that place where you can run JavaScript is Node.js. So how you install Node.js? You can just go to this nodejs.org website, and you can just download the Node.js, double click it, install. And Node.js is installed on your system. So it's not something that you can see. ඒගොල්ලන්ට පේන දෙයක් නෙමෙයි. Node.js install කරා කියලා ඔයාලට බලන්න මොකුත් user interface එකක් මොකුත් නැහැ. It's just some system tool. But how you can use it? You can use it using the commands, CLIs. So if you install Node on your computer, you can write node-v, and you can see which version of Node have you installed in your system. So the latest version is around Node 21 or something, but I'm using an older version. Doesn't really matter. But you need Node inside your system. When you install Node, you will get a whole set of another packages as well. You will get something called npm. Node install කරද්දී npm කියලා එකකුත් ඔටෝම install වෙනවා. What is npm? npm stands for Node Package Manager. When we are developing these full stack applications, we can't write everything from scratch. For example, if you need to, let's say, do a file upload, or if you need to, let's say, generate a QR code, there are already people who have done that, and they have compiled their code into packages. And those packages are stored in npm repository. So this is npm repository. So this repository contains a lot of packages that other people have done. For example, if you want to do something with QR, just search QR and node QR. This is a package. So this package will help you create QR codes very easily. So what you have to do is npm I QR. So npm I means npm install QR. And let's say you want to have some, I don't know what, you want to have a PDF reader, maybe. So just have this one, PDF reader JS. So you can just give the file path to the PDF and then you can read it. Like that, where there's millions of packages that other people have developed that you can use. And the way you can use it using this package manager called npm. In order to use that, you have to install Node. So the only thing we have done so far is just install Node, and then you have everything you need to create a full stack application. Okay, so we have Node installed, and I ran npm init. And when I ran npm init, I had this package.json file. And then what I did was I just created this index.js. And after I just had this index.js, I wrote this code. This 19 lines, මේ line 19ට තමයි අපි කියන්නේ backend app කියලා. So this 19 lines inside the index.js, you can call it a backend. So this is a backend application. We use something called Express. We use something called Course. So those are some packages. So if you copy this Express and go to the npm.js and search it, you have Express. What is Express? It's a fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node.js. Simply means it's a web server. Express is a web server. Is Express the only server? No. There's so many other servers that I don't even know about. But Express is a good web server. Now we can go to the buzzword MERN stack, mean stack. Have you heard of those buzzwords? So in those MERN stack, mean stack, so MERN stack. Here in the MERN stack, you can see. So this MERN stack, Mongo, Express, React, Node.js. That is what MERN stands for. So the E, this Express, is what we have used here. I hope that's clear. So that's Express, that's backend server. But it says course, don't worry about that course. Just know that it's something to do with security. Because when we connect the backend and the front end, we do need some security allowance to connect the front end with the backend, because we don't want anybody to connect to our backend. So that is something of a security concern. Forget about that for the moment. But you can see in the third line, we are creating an application, a server application. So this single variable is our backend app. The variable named app, this is our backend. When I was starting full stack development, the hardest part for me to understand was, first thing, why do we need a backend? මොකටද backend එකක් ඕනේ? So that was one of the burning questions that I had when I was learning full stack development. And the answer to that question is because we do need to process the information. Now take the restaurant example. When you go to a restaurant and you order food, you don't want to take the food out of the fridge and eat, right, directly without cooking. So that's the same as just connecting your front end to the back end. You need to process it. You need to cook the food. That's what the backend is for. If there is no Express app, you can't cook the food. You just have to take it from the fridge and eat. So that's no good, right? So that is why we need a backend. And the other question that I had when I was learning this full stack development was, how can I see this backend? How can I see this backend actually so that I can see, okay, this is the backend? Because the front end we can see. Front end is what we have in the browser. We can see buttons, we can see icons. That is front end, easy. But where is the actual backend? So that is, so I got a question. That's an interesting question, actually. So what I was saying was, we do need the backend stuff to process the data. And the question that I got was, can't we cook from the front end JS? That's a really, really good question. Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because we do have the JS, JavaScript on the front end as well. So we might as well cook the food there, right? But not, no. Why? That is a really good question, because you have to understand the functional dependency between the front end and the back end in order to answer that question. If you take a simple application, you can have one backend. For all the users, there's only one backend. But for all the users, there is a copy of the front end. There's a copy of the front end. So let's take Moodle. You have an assignment. So you have a Moodle assignment. And you log into the Moodle, you have 30 minutes to do the questionnaire. And let's assume you cook in the front end. So let's assume there's no back end. So you get 30 minutes for the quiz. And if you cook in the front end in the sense, if you have the logic in this front end JS file, what you can do is, as a student, you can go to the browser settings and change the code to have 1 hour instead of 30 minutes. See the problem there? It is technically possible, but we don't do that. Why? Because we don't trust the clients. So we don't have any important logic in the front end JS, because the clients can manipulate that JS. So if Moodle has their logic on the front end, we can go to the browser, we can have all the correct answers for the quizzes, we can have all the full marks for the assignments. We don't need to worry about anything, because the clients cannot be trusted. So it can be manipulated. So every important logic, we have to put in the backend side. But the front end JS, what it does is, it will give us a pathway to connect the front end and the back end. So I'll tell you how that is done once I'm done with the back end. But yeah, that's the reason we are not having this JS important logic in the front end JS. Okay, so far we created this Express application, and we have some host name and the port. Just know these are some stuff that you need to connect to the backend from the front end. For example, in a restaurant, there's a kitchen. So you need to know where, in which floor is the kitchen, and which one is the kitchen door. Like that way, you need to understand the place of the kitchen. So the host name and the port is basically giving the position of that kitchen. So think of host name as a floor, even if the kitchen and port can be the door of the kitchen. So you give in which floor, which door is the backend. And in the front end, you can see we are using those values. So this is the host name we define in the backend JS. And this is the port that we define in the backend JS. So basically giving the host name and the port means how can you connect to the backend from the front end? That's host name and port. And enable course for all routes. Like I said, this is a security thing. We just enable it right like this for development. But when we are actually doing this in production, we have to consider some security policies, but we are not interested in that for this learning purpose. Okay. And the other thing is get route handler. This get route handler, you have to understand the HTTP methods to understand this. What are HTTP methods? Just let's Google it. HTTP methods. So these are the HTTP methods that are there. Get, post, put, delete, patch, head, options, trace, connect, whatever, There's so many HTTP methods. But right now, what we use is the get HTTP method. Why do we need the get HTTP method? It's to retrieve some data from the backend. So when you say, I need pasta to the waiter will get the data from the backend and take to you. What is post? Post means you need to create something. Okay, so you need to create something. You send a post request. For example, we are going to create a to-do application in this session. Next, so in that, creating a to-do request requires a post method. Don't worry about that for now. Just know get is what we are using for this demo. So that is why we call it app.get. If we are sending a post request, it should be post. So get. And this slash means, so remember we are running this on the port 3000 and the host name this. So when we run the application, run that backend application, how can we run the backend application? We can run the backend application like this. So what we can do is we can go to this, and then in the backend, what I can do is in order to run this app, I just run npm run dev. And now you can see when I run that, it's starting node index.js. So node is running this index.js file. We are only interested in the backend right now. So this index.js file, it's a single JavaScript file. We are running it using node. So node index.js. The reason I ran npm run dev was because I have set a shortcut here. So this dev, it can be any name. It could be like Rukshan, and then I could have run npm run Rukshan. So it's just really not a matter. When I run that, it will actually run nodemon index.js. So nodemon mean it will run the index.js file using node. And when you run this index.js file, it will create, everything is happening from the top. Line 1 එකේ ඉඳලා තමයි යටට යන්නේ. So it will first create express, import express, and then in the third line create an express app. So that is the actual backend application. And then it will define the host name and the port, enable course, and then enable a route handler, as we call it. මේකට අපි route handler එකක් කියලා කියන්නේ. And then we listen. The backend application is listening. So the chef is already listening in the kitchen for the waiter. So the waiter will say, okay, there's an order for 2 pasta. Okay, there's an order for 2 pizza. Like that way, the chef is always listening to the waiter. So the backend is always listening through the APIs. So this get route handler, we can call as an API endpoint. Okay, so just know this API endpoint is the place where the backend and the front end is connecting. If you go to the front end now, front end JS, and you can see we have this. So we have the HTTP ://127.0.0.1 Up to that is the host name and the port. You remember, right? In the backend JS, you can see the host name is 127.0.0.1 and the port is 3000. So that is host name and the port up to this. And there's another /. So this / is the API endpoint. So in the backend, you can see this part. මෙතෙන්ට ආවොත් මෙන්න මේ ටික කරන්න කියලා තමයි මේ කියලා දෙන්නේ backend එකේ. මෙතෙන්ට කවුරු ආවද? request එකක් ආවා. So the request we send using this fetch. Fetch is another, think of as a tool. So you can just use the fetch function, fetch method to send a request to this API endpoint. මෙන්න මේ API endpoint එකට request එකක් යවනවා front end එකේ ඉඳලා. දැන් මේ තියෙන index.js එක front end එකේ index.js එක. ඒකෙන් අපි request එකක් යවනවා මෙන්න මේ endpoint එකට. එතකොට අර back end එක බලාගෙන ඉන්නවා මේ handler එක through මෙන්න මේ endpoint එකට request එකක් ආපු ගමන් මෙන්න මේ code ටික execute කරනවා. Let me repeat that. So the front end is sending an API request through this endpoint. This whole thing, we call it an API endpoint. Host name, port, and the actual handler. We can call it an API endpoint. And we call it using the fetch method. And when we do that, we send a request to this API endpoint. Okay. So after we do that, what we can see is whatever we are sending through that, we can have within our front end display. So what I'll do now is, so I get the code that I deleted earlier. So this one, copy, go to the HTML, paste it. So this is importing of the index.js in the front end. Then ඉස්සලා අපි CSS file එක import කරා වගේ දැන් අපි front end එකට script file එක import කරනවා. So this is the way we are importing the script file, the index.js. And once we import that, you can see this one changed, right? This changed to pizza. And but here you can see it's saying hello world for IEEE SB UI. Now if I remove this import of the script tag and refresh this, still is hello world for IEEE SBM. But if I put it again, the script tag, it will be pizza. Why is it pizza? Because we have specified in the front end index.js to get the data from the backend. So this backend is sending the data pizza. Pizza කියලා data එකක් backend එකෙන් එවනවා. ඒ එවන backend එකේ data ටික තමයි මෙතන index එකේ පෙන්නන්නේ. So I can have this pasta, whatever. And then refresh. And it's pasta. So that is a full stack application. It only displays the information coming from the backend, of course. Of course, you don't need a full stack application to do this specific thing, but still, it's a full stack application. Right? So, I mean, you could have done the same thing without any backend stuff using this. Just replace the text here. It still displays pasta. But the way it works is different. This text is displayed by getting data from the backend. Right? So, for example, when you go to a restaurant, you can bring pasta yourself and keep it on the table and eat it. But that's different than ordering the food from the chef, right? So that's the static or the website versus a web app. We did have index.html, index.css, index.js in the front end, and we did have an index.js file in the back end. Now you might be wondering, what is this node modules file? So that node modules is a temporary folder that is, considering all the stuff that are required for our application. But we don't worry about it because it's auto-generated. We can delete it anytime we want. And when we run npm install, it will be created again. It will be created because we have everything defined in the package.json. So any questions up to here? I know it might not be like 100% clear. Is it clear? Thank you. Someone is saying that it is clear. But if it's not clear, just let me know. I can clarify again. Okay, cool. So that's just front end and the back end. That's full stack. No matter how complicated your application is going to be, this is the fundamental. I don't care if it is Google, Gmail, if it is Facebook, this is the fundamental stuff. Of course, when it comes to production, you have to consider a lot of other things. You have to consider scalability. You have to consider more security. You have to consider about caching. But still, it is front-end HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and back-end JavaScript. And in between, there's going to be an API. That's it. Now, you might be wondering, where is this API? Is it something that we can see? So the front end, you can see clearly, there's HTML, CSS, JavaScript. The backend, you can see clearly JavaScript. Now, where's this API? API is not something that you can see, but it's there. So this endpoint, we call it an API. So if you want to do something else, let's say app.get, and I can have hello IEEE, whatever, and then, code it like this, rest. By the way, the rest stands for request and response. And then I can just say the same thing, but I can have like hello IEEE. So now if I go to this thing and okay, it has to be running, the backend has to be running, npm run dev. Okay, it's dev, npm run dev. And I go to this and it's pasta. So you can even use the browser to see the backend stuff, because the get requests, you can use the URL search bar. So this is and this get request, you can use the URL, and then here you can just say hello IEEE. Yeah, mistake. Hello IEEE, get request. Okay, let's see. Here have to be the here have to be the /. That's how it identifies it as an API endpoint. So you can just have it. Hello IEEE. So you can see now it is displaying hello IEEE. The API endpoint is this dash hello IEEE. So that is another API endpoint. So now you can see there are two API endpoints. So these are the APIs. You can add as many as you can. Okay. So that is the backend APIs. I hope that's clear. And now we can go to the other stuff. So where were we? We were here. Okay. So that is demo one. And the only requirement that you need to install in your computer was Node. So you can install Node directly using this website, the official website, or you could have also installed Node using Node Version Manager, which I personally prefer, because when you use this Node Version Manager, you can have different Node versions within your system very easily. For example, let me just show that as a pro tip. So if you have Node Version Manager, NVM use 21. So if I have NVM installed, you could have just easily installed or use that Node version for the project, because different Node versions are required for different projects. So sometimes you need the latest one. So if you have NVM installed, what you can do is NVM use 21, and then you will be using NVM Node version 21. And if you need Node 18, just 18. And now we're using Node version 18. Like that way, you can manage your Node versions very easily if you're using this Node version manager. So it's an open source project. You can just install it in Windows, in Linux, Mac, anything, you can use it. So that's a lot. That was the basic full stack app that you can create. Now you might be wondering, okay, I saw so many things during that tutorial. One thing you saw HTML, you saw CSS, you saw JavaScript, and also you saw Node, and you saw some package JSON. So many things you saw. Now you might be wondering, where can I start? I don't even know how to write an HTML. How can I start? And that's exactly where now we're going to talk about traditional fundamentals. So there is a great website called roadmap.sh. What they provide is a full stack, it provides several roadmaps. So any roadmap to be a front-end developer, back-end developer, there's a lot of roadmaps. So if you need to become a software architect, what is the roadmap? You can click this and it will tell you everything you need to learn in order to become a software architect. So what we are interested in, full stack development. So let's go with full stack development. So full stack development. So you have to start from here. And when you start from there, you first have to master HTML. And if you need to know what you need to do, just click this and it will tell you HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's used in front end and gives the structure to the web page. I hope you remember I told you when we were writing that full stack application, the simple one, HTML, we gave the structure to the web page and style using CSS and make it interactive using JavaScript. So these are some free links that you can use to learn specifically HTML. And once you're done with HTML, you can go to the next step, which is CSS. You click the button and you see CSS or cascading style sheets is a language used to style the front end of any website. So the colors, shapes, shadows, animations, you can do this using CSS. And JavaScript allows you to add interactivity to your web pages. Okay, so yeah, so the name of the website is roadmap.sh. Okay, roadmap.sh. So JavaScript, you can learn what JavaScript does. So many stuff related to JavaScript. You can't master JavaScript ever. You have to learn it every day because JavaScript itself is developing. Okay, and then after JavaScript done, you can go to the NPM. You can learn how NPM works for the Node Package Manager, how you can do the NPM stuff. You can go through it. Yep. And then after you're done with NPM, you have to go to the Git. Now, Git, I have a separate slide for that, but I'll tell you right now what is Git. Git is a way to track your development. So when you're using Git, you won't lose your code. For example, you might be working with a team. In your university projects, you might have several teams. Now, when there's teams, when you work in a team, you need to share your code. For example, one person may be working in login authentication. The other person may be working with file sharing. The other person may be working with commenting, whatever. So when you're working in a team, you need to combine this code. So Git is the best way you can do that. So Git is very important to keep track of your code. And GitHub is where Git stores the data. So GitHub is one, and then there's GitLab, Bitbucket, Azure DevOps. So there are so many places you can store your code. And Tailwind CSS. Now, you might remember CSS. Tailwind CSS is like an additional abstraction, or how can I say that? So I have Tailwind CSS in the next demo, so I will show you that. But it's basically an easier way to write CSS. So when it comes to actual production, we don't actually write HTML, we don't actually write CSS, we don't actually write JavaScript alone. We use frameworks. And when we use frameworks, these Tailwind CSS, React, these things come into play and they make our lives very easy. Okay, so even if you look at this code, the one that I showed you earlier, this index.html, you can see, it's somewhat hard to understand and somewhat hard to reuse. For example, if there's another part where you need to show this hello world for IEEE SBM, just have to copy this whole thing and paste it here. It's not very good, because if you need to change this text, IEEE SBOM, you need to change in both places. So those are some problems we have with this HTML development. So in these cases, we have to go for some framework like React, Vue, or Next.js or whatever. So let's get into that. But this is a framework or a library. React is more or less a library. So it's making your life easy to write user interfaces without using HTML, CSS alone. Okay, and then after that you can learn Node.js. After that, Postgres, which is a database, RESTful APIs. So API endpoints that I showed you. So these things are there. And JWT authentication. So this is related with authentication. So you need to log in your users and give only the users who are logged in the access to your backend. So Redis is another sort of database. Linux basics. For example, when I was showing the code, I hope you remember that I was typing some commands in the terminal. For example, make, dir, and so cd, back, like that way. So I was writing some commands. So those are Unix commands or Linux commands, and you need those commands to be familiarized as well, and basic AWS. So when you want to deploy or make your full stack application available on the internet, because right now I'm just showing you on my local computer, you can't access it. You can't access that using local host, whatever, even though my application is running on the backend. So here, if I run npm run dev, if I go to this IP address, I can see pasta. But if you go to that same address, you can't see pasta because it's running locally on my computer. If you also need to access my web application, I need to deploy it to some cloud like AWS, GCP, Azure, or something. So this cloud knowledge is also important. And the other stuff are more advanced. So these are needed if you have like tens of thousands of users or millions of users. You need to see how much RAM your application is using. You have to automate the deployment. So whenever you push your code to GitHub, you need to enable it to all the users. Whenever there's an update to the feature, you have to deploy it to the GitHub and it will be automatically available to all the users. And Terraform is another thing that you need to get it up and running on the cloud. So these are getting more advanced as you go down the tree or the roadmap. But I urge you to start from HTML. Don't start with React. Don't start with Angular. Don't start with Vue. Because these frameworks come and go. They change. Sometime you might get that, okay, React is the way to go. Learn React. You can master React and then there's no need to do anything else. That's not correct because React is just a tooling. That's the difference between a software developer and a software engineer. A software developer knows how to use tools. They know to do things with React. They know how to use Node.js. But they don't know how fundamentally these things work. That is known by a software engineer. And if you're about to thrive in the world of full stack development, you need to be a software engineer rather than a software developer. I don't mean having a degree. Having a degree is good, but it's not what differentiates an engineer from a developer. What differentiates is you need to have the fundamentals. You need to understand the fundamentals of web development. You need to understand what is HTML. What's it actually doing? It's actually giving the structure to a web page. So React is one way of doing that. Angular is another way of doing that. Vue is another way of doing that. But that import thing is a core functionality, which is the structure. So you have to learn this, not the other stuff around that. Because if you learn this first, and if you have a strong foundation with this first, the core or the fundamental, then you can learn React, Vue, Angular, whatever. So I'll tell you my personal story from this. So when I was in university, I tried learning React. It was very difficult for me to understand React. I couldn't even create a simple web application in React. But I learned HTML then. Then I learned Angular. Angular was very good. I liked it a lot. Then one of my seniors told me to try React. Even though I didn't like it at the first approach, I used React a lot. And then I thought, okay, React is the best. There's no framework to hit React. And then after a couple of years, another senior told me to learn Vue or Nuxt, which is another framework. Then I thought, okay, Nuxt is the best. That's really cool. Then I started using Nuxt. But now at my job, I'm using React, and sometimes I have to use HTML, sometimes I have to use Python. But still, I have the fundamentals, so it doesn't really matter which framework I'm using. I just have to read some specific documentation stuff, and I know, okay, this is meaning this. Because that fundamentals are still there. But if you only know React, if you only learn React, and if you have to go to a job or a company that is doing Angular, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And because of that, I urge you, learn the fundamentals. This roadmap is more than enough for you to get started. So these stuff just go up to even up to Redis is enough just to get some good understanding of full stack development. So just go through the roadmap and then you're good to go. Okay, so those are like the fundamentals that you need to tackle. Now, server-side programming, what we did in the backend. So this is exactly the code that I earlier coded. So here you can see the route handler. I told you the API endpoint, and then the listening part, like the chef listening to the waiter. Okay, so how is it doing that? It's through something called the Node.js event loop. So the Node.js is what is running this JavaScript code, and it is with a loop. It's going through the code and it's listening every second. It's listening to outside requests, listening to these route handlers. The main point එකට request එක එනකන් මේ Node.js app එක Express app එක අහුම්කන් දීගෙන ඉන්නවා, listen කරගෙන ඉන්නවා. So that is what is happening here. It's iteratively listening every second. And so Express.js routing, so this route handlers, we call it routing. And error handling patterns, so these things are additional stuff you need to worry about. For example, what if an error occurs? You have to handle it, right? So error handling is another thing. So those are additional stuff, but basically this is what you need to know about a backend, a simple backend or server side. And then the client side is what you saw as the front end, which is basically the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript for connecting to the backend. So this is an example of an error handling. For example, so I'll explain the code. So we are trying to call the API endpoint. So this API endpoint, will be called, and when it calls, okay, assume you're calling a phone number, and we are calling the phone number, and then here the request will be sent. So this request will be sent to this place, and then rest.send means send the response. So the response is actually response, okay? So send the response passed up, just in plain text. We just have to define the type. So just know we have to define the type like this, rest.type, and then we send the data from the backend to the front end. This is actual, the 14th line is sending the data from the backend to the front end. The May 14th line එකෙන් තමයි chef අර waiter හරහා කැම ටික ආපහු ඉස්සරහට යවන්නේ. So this is that. And once we get the data from the backend, so then data, this is when the waiter takes the food from the kitchen to the table. What we do, we document.get element by id.innerText.data. Simply what we are doing is changing the text of the HTML element with text with ID message. මේ ID එක message කියලා තියෙන HTML element එකේ text එක අර backend එකකින් ඉන්න data වලට සමාන කරන එක තමයි කරන්නේ, assign කරන එක. So what is the data coming from the backend? Is the text. It's the text pasta. Pasta කියන text එක තමයි data විදිහට backend එකෙන් එන්නේ. ඒ එන data ටික අපි assign කරනවා අර message කියලා ID එක තියෙන element එකේ text එකට. So that is this. Let me repeat that once more. We call the API endpoint or the route. So someone is asking, what is a route? Route is a pathway where your data can take. For example, let's assume there are so many chefs in the kitchen. So there is a seafood chef and there is another, let's say, seafood chef, another food type, another food item chef. And you are going to the seafood chef, like seafood, and then it will send crabs, whatever. So if you go to the seafood chef and ask for crabs, sorry, seafood. I go to the seafood seafood, and I get crabs. So the route is like one chef, one path your data can take. Data වලට යන පුළුවන් එක path එකක් තමයි route කියලා කියන්නේ. අර slash එකෙන් පස්සේ අපි දාන දෙයට තමයි අපි route එක කියලා කියන්නේ. So this is the seafood route. And if you need to have another route, let's say bakery, whatever, bakery. And then you can have bread. So if you go to this, so you can go to 3000 slash bakery, it will return bread. If you go to seafood, it will return crabs. So if you go to the seafood chef, he will give you crabs. If you go to the bakery chef, if that is even a thing, you'll get bread. So that is the routes, different routes. So there are two routes, or we call it two API endpoints. I hope that's clear. And now if you go to the front end, you'll see an error. Okay, so that is good. It's a big error. Why do we have an error? Why do we have an error? Because now you can see the endpoint that we are calling is not defined in the backend. We have only two API endpoints, which is seafood and bakery, slash seafood and slash bakery. But we are calling the slash endpoint or the root endpoint. We have not defined it. So what we can do is we can create another endpoint again. And this time we call it the root endpoint or just slash. And then we can send in the response, call seafood or bakery endpoints. And now if you go, okay, call seafood or bakery endpoints. So now this is there. Okay. So if you need to call this front end stuff, again, sorry, another different API endpoint, you can just have bakery. And now bread. If you do it seafood and refresh crabs. See, depending on the API endpoint that you call from the front end, you get different data. That's the whole point of invoking different API endpoints. So this document object model, DOM, is actually the structure of the HTML. So if you can see in the front end index.html, I have something called document.getElement by ID message.innertext.data. This is DOM manipulation, what we call it. DOM manipulation එක කියලා කියන්නේ. DOM manipulation කියන්නේ document object model manipulation. What is a document object model? It is like the structure of the HTML. And we can get different tags using different identifiers. So here we are using get element by ID. So in the index.html, whatever element is with the ID message will be returned by this part. මෙන්න මේ part එකෙන් return කරන්නේ කියන්නේ ඒ part එකෙන් ගන්නේ message කියලා ID එකක් තියෙන DOM එකේ element එක. So element එක means this div element. This div element is with the ID message and it will be taken by this DOM manipulation. Okay, so that is about the front end. Okay. So we have around 15 minutes. I'll try to go quick to the next demo. So traditional fundamentals, version control is very important. So you had to use Git and GitHub in order to keep track of your development stuff. So I can show you my GitHub history. So when I was developing this application, I use Git and GitHub. And I think I can show this. Okay, here. So here, I hope you can see my VS Code. And here, this is the history of my development. So before this workshop talk, before this session, I developed this application. And you can see, so this is actually an old application that I had developed. It's 9 months ago. So the original code base that I'm showing you this was 9 months ago. So what I did 9 months ago, so the original code base that I have, that I'm showing you right now, was coded 9 months ago. So you can see here, it's 9 months ago, April 3rd, 2024. But still I can see what was I doing that day. And afterwards, I did some changes 3 hours ago before the talk. And you can see what things I did there. So like that way, Git will store the history of your development. So it's very easy to keep track of your development, and it shows who did what. So since I'm only developing this application, only shows my profile picture. But if you have like 4 members in your group, you can clearly see who did what. So when it comes to your project contributions, very easy to track who was working, who was not working, who should be given more tasks. Like that way, very easy to track using Git. So Git in and of itself should be a separate talk. I can't go into the specifics of Git right now. What I can tell you is you need to learn Git and you need to learn GitHub. So there are so many commands in Git. You can learn them. For example, if you need to get the updated code, you have to run git pull. So it will pull everything from GitHub. And if you need to we need to push to GitHub, you need to git push. Like that way, so many Git commands are there. So it's a separate talk. So just know something called Git is there, and you need to learn Git and GitHub. And the other thing is deployment. So like I said, in order for your application to be available for all the users in the internet, or to the users that you need to give access to only, you need to deploy it. Deploying means you make it available to the internet. Simple as that. So in order to do that, there are so many platforms. There is Netlify, there is Vercel, there is Coolify, there is AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean. There's a whole lot of things that are available for the deployment. And the architecture. So you saw, so someone is also asking about this in the chat. So right now I have the backend and the front end inside a single Git repository. But when you're actually developing this in the production level, you need to have separate repositories or separate GitHub folders, you can call, to store this code. And when we are doing that, you need to architecture your code following some best practices. You are not writing everything without any plan. You need to have some plan. So there are already some designed architectures that are available. For example, the MVC, the model weave controller pattern, is one way to write code in full stack development. And there is another one called model weave model type, or the MVVM. So this is MVC, there's another MVVM, and so many other types. And there is microservice versus monolith. So microservices means when your application have millions of users, you can't have one single backend. You have to have separate, smaller components deployed in several places. So that is microservices. Those are complicated concepts. So I'm just telling you that these things exist, but to get started in web development or the full stack development, you don't need to worry about anything. You're just writing monolith applications. That's what we are doing normally. So just know they are existing and no need to do, but no need to think about anything else. Single responsibility means one thing should be done by one specific part of the code. For example, in the code that I showed you, the structure is given by HTML, the styling is given by CSS, the functionality of the front end is given by the JS. So they are concerned with one thing only: HTML with the structure, CSS with the looks, and the JS with the functionality. So that is like a single responsibility principle. And there's a security stuff that you have to consider. So course that you saw in this code. So this course is one security thing that we have to consider. Like that way, there are so many other stuff. And also when it comes to performance, you have to think about caching. For example, your application may have images to load. So every time you can't download the images. So you have to cache them. So caching strategies have to be implemented. So all these things are additional stuff. You don't need any of these to get a web app running. So these are to make your web app better. Okay. So I don't know if you have heard of the quote, first get it working and then get it working better. So don't try to grab everything at first. Just make something smaller and then try to go with the improvements. And now on to the future of web development. Now I know you are using Claude, you are using ChatGPT, you are using Gemini to do your maybe assignments, maybe your coding activities. But the thing is, as a full stack software developer or an engineer, you should use these tools very wisely. There's so many applications in full stack development when it comes to this code stuff. Okay. But the thing is, you should not blindly copy paste. This is one thing my mentor said. So he said, no, you can ask ChatGPT to write a code, but you have to understand the code and then use it. That's very important because these LLMs or large language models like ChatGPT, Claude, they are not 100% perfect. They might give you code that look okay or good, but in reality they are bad. Bad in the sense they might be slow, they might be secure, they might not be secure, they might not even work. Like that way, you have to use your own fundamental knowledge with these AI tools in order to get the maximum use of them. And the other thing, will AI replace job market? Honestly, I don't know. I'm not qualified enough to answer that question, but I can tell you this. It's very easy to replace a developer or an engineer who have a limited set of skills because I have used some tools myself to convert a design to code. For example, builder.io is one such tool. So you can just give the link of your Figma file and it will create your front end in an instant in any framework you need. React, Vue, HTML, Angular, Svelte, Tailwind, whatever. You just have to click a button and it will give you the full code base. It's scary. So just know with the AI development, the skill set that you had 5 years ago may become obsolete and may be not enough to thrive in the job market. So you need to have some engineering principles, engineering fundamentals within your skill set in order to surpass these AI tools. Otherwise, if you are just someone who are trying to, you know, convert a design from Figma to code and hope that will be the end of it, then there's a problem because these AI tools are getting better day by day. So if you're about to thrive in the job market, I think you have to be confident in the fundamentals. Because I can tell you from experience. So recently, in a team that I worked as well, so sometimes we do replace the workload of people using AI tools, especially in the front end stuff. I'm not saying that is the case everywhere, but it can happen. I'm not telling you to scare you, but just know if you're with the fundamentals and if you are strong on your fundamentals, you don't need to worry about anything. So that is why I'm telling you not to depend on the tools, depend on the fundamentals, the concepts. So, and the other thing, there's so many frameworks. You can't learn them all. Even I've not tried some of these things. I've not used Django ever. I don't even know what is that. Okay. I have never used Laravel. I don't know what's that. I have used Spring Boot, but very minimally. So Angular, I've used some. React, I have used some. Vue, I have. So don't get overwhelmed with the number of frameworks that are out there. Frameworks කොච්චර තිබුණත් කමක් නැහැ. ඒ ඔක්කොම ඉගෙන ගන්න යන්න නම් එපා. Fundamentals ටික ඉගෙනගෙන frameworks දෙක තුනක් හොඳට practice කරලා තියාගන්න. ඉස්සරහට career එකේ යද්දී ටික ටික ඔයාලට specialize වෙන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි. මම නම් React විතරයි කරන්න කියලා ඉන්න එපා කියන එක තමයි මගේ suggestion එක. So my suggestion is just don't think, okay, I'm a React person. I don't want Angular. I don't want Vue like that. Don't stick to one tool set. Have the ability to use any tool by grabbing the concepts or the fundamentals. Okay, now demo 2. Now the earlier demo was just HTML, CSS. It was very simple. We had one HTML file, one index.js, one CSS file. And now we're going to up the ante. So we are going to have a real full stack application. So this one is using Next.js. I don't know whether you have heard of Next.js, but Next.js is a really cool framework. It has its downsides, but it's very good. I will show you the application first, and then you will be able to see for yourself. Okay, so this is the full stack application. Now, this is more like a web app, right? Not like what we saw earlier. So this is a to-do application, and this is connected even with a database as well. So I can show you everything that is the front end, back end, database, everything is under this folder. So I'm not using any cloud database. The database is in this. So this is the database. You can see. So these are the table columns that I have. I have an ID column, name column, description, status. So this is the database. It's single file, SQLite database. And so I can show you the functionality. So I can say deliver talk at IEEE SPUIM. And then what is today? Saturday 28th. And then add task. So I added the task. Now I refresh the browser. It's still there. Why? I have updated the database. So I can go to the database. And now you can see deliver talk at IEEE SBM is the name in the database, and the description is Saturday 28th and status is pending. I can make it as done. Click that. And now in the database, you can see the status is completed. So you saw, right, the activity of this thing. So the whole full stack application was about managing the to-dos. What can I do? I can create a to-do. I can even edit a to-do. So I can edit it and update it, save. So everything is done using this application. So how does it work? It works by using the same principles that we use for the simple full stack application as well. What was a simple full stack application having? It had HTML, the structure. It had CSS, the beauty, and then the JavaScript, the functionality. You will see the shadows of those concepts in Next.js as well. I just want to show you that no matter how complicated the app gets, it's still the same fundamentals. මට ඕනේ අර ඉස්සෙල්ලා අපි බලපු simple app එකේ තිබ්බ concepts ටිකම තමයි මේ වගේ complex app එකක් හැදුවත් තියෙන්නේ කියලා පෙන්නන්න. නැත්නම් මට මෙතන Next.js ගන්නන්න නෙමෙයි ඕනේ. Okay? Because 1.5 hours is not enough to teach you the whole Next.js app, but you can still see what you saw in the simple app. The first thing, HTML. Where's the structure? So in the Next.js, we do it using React. We do the structure using React. So these, you can see they are more or less HTML, right? They are like the tags. The text area tag is there. The div tag is there. So this is the structure. That is the structure of the HTML or the web page that you're seeing. So the blue color button, or the add task. So the add task is here. Or I can rename it to add Rukshan. See, it's different. Still, the same concept. What you saw in the earlier simple HTML, this HTML, you remember, right? You remember I'm changing this to Rukshan, whatever, this HTML. Similarly, in the Next.js also, you just have to change the content of this HTML element. And what about the CSS, the styling? The styling in earlier app, we use the index.css. May CSS එක change කරලා තමයි අපි background color එකම change කරේ. How can we do that in Next.js or React? We are using something called Tailwind CSS. Remember earlier in the roadmap, I showed you Tailwind. So in Tailwind, what we can do is use these utility classes. So we can say class name and then blue. So instead of blue, I say red and then save it. And here now it's red. See how easy it is? Still the same concept. Of course, we are using utility classes or Tailwind CSS, but still that same fundamental thinking. HTML for the structure, CSS for the beauty. That is still there. And now comes the functionality. Earlier in the simple full stack application, we use a simple JavaScript file. How can we do that in the Next.js web app? We have to do it using TypeScript. It can be JavaScript as well, but still here you can see we are writing separate logic. So in Next.js, we have the front-end logic or the front-end JS. Within the same file, we are specifying the looks. දැන් අර HTML, JSS, CSS කියලා දෙකක් තිබ්බනේ, තුනක් තිබ්බනේ simple front end එකේදී. ඒකේ HTML, CSS, JavaScript ඔක්කොම එක ෆයිල් එකේ තමයි React වල අපි ගහලා තියෙන්නේ page.txx කියන එකේ. So here you could see the HTML and the CSS. And here in the top of the file, you can see the JavaScript code. The same code, the similar code that we used in the index.js of the front end in the earlier simple web app. And what about the backend part when it comes to Next.js? So the good thing about Next.js is it is a full stack framework. You can write the front end code and the backend code in the same Next.js application. So here in the API folder, this is very important. In the API folder, we have to write the backend code. So these are the backend code. So see, select all from to-dos. This is SQL. You know SQL, right? So in the earlier one, since I didn't have a database, I just wrote the simple JavaScript code in the earlier backend here. Some API endpoints, app.get. So this is the app.get. Now in the Next.js, similar thing. Here we write it as export async function get instead of app.get. Still the same thing. We have a get endpoint and we have some logic inside that get endpoint handler. So this is the route handler in Next.js. In simple JavaScript, this is the route handler for the Express application. So what I wanted to tell was, you can see the same concepts in any complicated full stack web application. You only need to understand this basic full stack app. The front end with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and the back end with a single JavaScript file. That's your full stack application. Even if you needed to connect a database, you just have to modify this index.js file in the back end, not on the front end, because the chef is interacting with the waiter. You don't go in the restaurant and ask the chef for food directly. Restaurant chef can waiter. So the waiter will ask from the chef. Like that way, the backend is concerned with connecting with the database. And it's acting as an intermediary in getting you the data and sending the request from you to the backend of the database and updating the database, getting the data from the database. That is similar to putting food in the fridge, getting food from the fridge and cooking it. So that's basically what you have even for a very complicated full stack web application as well. Now, I know you might be overwhelmed with the structure of this Next.js project, the main Next.js project that come, but are complicated. But the thing is, I'm getting to the next part of this. So, right. I'm getting the next part of this, which is you need to understand to read documentation. So for Next.js, there is very clear documentation. That's how you learn. That's how you learn how these files are structured. Where should I write the code? Where should I write the code that I would have written for the structure? How can you change the color of the button? For that, you have to go to Tailwind CSS docs. This. Everything is there. Very interactive tutorials are also there. So you can see, as a full stack developer or an engineer, you have to be able to read technical documentation. I hardly watch any YouTube tutorial now. Sometimes I do need to, but I learn the skill of reading through documentation. Tutorial hell is something that you should avoid when you're getting to full stack web development. Otherwise, there are a lot of good YouTube channels available for full stack development, but you won't learn anything if you just keep watching these videos and not doing anything yourself. So what you have to do is you have to get your feet wet. You have to read what is the folder structure of a Next.js application. You can read through this. Okay, so the latest one is app router. The older one is pages router. So go to the app router and see installation, getting started. How can I install Next.js? Okay, okay, manual installation, right. So there is something called root layout. I don't know the project structure. So here, project structure and organization. This page provides an overview of the folder and the convention for Next.js. Like that way, it explains everything. So if you carefully, leisurely go through this documentation, you will be able to master Next.js. Is it for Next.js only? No, for Nuxt.js. Nuxt is another good framework based on Vue. So Next.js is using React. Nuxt.js is using Vue. Vue has their own documentation. If you need to learn about SEO, there's a separate page available. If you need to learn about how a web page is rendered, server-side rendering, components, we can learn about those things here. How to style your application, how to have different colors, different buttons, animations. Everything is here. How to add an image. Everything is here. So go through the documentation. You can save so much time by learning how to read documentation of technical frameworks, technology frameworks. That's a very important skill to have as a software engineer. Okay, so food for thought. I'm trying to stop this. So before that, food for thought. This is what you should get from this talk. Create something yourself. Now you have the ability to create something yourself. It can be very simple, but create it. Get it on the road, even if a three-wheeled car. The car may not be so fast, but you can get it up and running. It's better than going through 5 hours of YouTube tutorials. It's a fact. You know, it's not really motivating to write something bad, but trust me, you'll be learning far faster if you try to write yourself code rather than going through the YouTube tutorial hell. That's a fact. You can write a simple to-do app, share it as a public GitHub repository, share it on LinkedIn, Facebook. There's so many helpful Facebook groups to get started with software development. Read the docs, like I said, and stay up to date. So dev.to is a good website to stay up to date in the latest technical trends. And the other thing, go to hackathons. So I love this. I've been going to hackathons all my university life as much as possible. And the earlier years, first year, second year, we were not getting any places. We were going to a competition, we are lost. We are lost. We are trying, we are not getting any places, but we learned and then we went to competitions anyway. So you can see this is one of the last competitions that we went as a team, and we were able to win 2 trophies at the competition. But we were not the best developers. I mean, these 4 people, including myself, are not the best developers in the world by any means. But we anyways tried it. In the first year, in the second year, we were not getting any places. We were just participating. But then we were able to win it. So go to hackathons. That's so underrated. You know, in order to become a good full stack developer, you have to go to hackathons. I'm just telling you this from experience, because you will learn so much, even if you fail. It's not about the money prices. It's not about the perks. It's about seeing how to solve a problem within 24 hours. For example, one of the hackathons was a 24-hour hackathon. So we had to come up with a full stack application within 24 hours. No sleep. So it's very fun. We learn so much during these hackathons and competitions. So go to them. No need to win places in the first 2 years or 3 years even. Just go to get the experience. And so I talked a lot. how can you get started right after this session? Go to, I'm telling you this first, before starting, I told you this is highly opinionated. This is from my experience. If you learn from somebody else, he or she might tell something else. But this is from my experience and what worked for me. Go to Free Code Camp. So I'm not sponsored by them or anything. This is from my personal experience. They have the responsive web design certification. Free. You don't need to pay anything. Just click it and then go to the first item and it will tell you how to get started. It will guide you one by one. You can read it. HTML elements have opening tags like H1 and closing tags like H1, blah, blah, blah. Change the text of H1 element below to hello world. So what you can do is change the text hello world. You don't need to install anything. It right in your browser. You can learn HTML. So that's the first step in becoming a master full stack developer, right? So simple. Check. And I made a mistake. What is that? So go to the bars, keep trying. Hello world. So what you can do is the word cat photo. Okay. So cat photo app and then submit it. Congratulations, your code passes, submit your code to continue. So you can go to the next one and it will tell you what to do. Like that, interactively, you can learn HTML. Not only HTML, in the free code camp, you have JavaScript, which is another one that you need in order to get the master skill in full stack. And also React. React have another good course, interactive course. So databases, if you need to get familiar with SQL, NoSQL, MongoDB, whatever, these things are there. APIs, even Python, even machine learning stuff are there. So I highly recommend you go through this. It's a good source that helped me learn HTML, CSS as well. And the other one is Solo Learn app, which I have myself used. So it's very interesting because it's a gamified learning environment. You can try with your friends. It's also free. You can just download it on your Android or iOS app, mobile phone. I think the web version is not available for the gamified version, but you can use the app. And you can learn any tool, any technology using your mobile phone. You can even code it. You can write HTML, you can write JavaScript. Very helpful resources. Okay, so I think that's basically it, what I had to share with you guys. I know it's a lot to digest within 2 hours, but I hope I could convey the things that I wanted to convey to you guys. So my takeaways, key takeaways from this talk, before you guys ask the questions, is first thing, learn the fundamentals. Second thing, be familiar with the tools and technologies, but don't 100% depend on them. Similar thing for AI tools, Claude, ChatGPT, use them. Don't worry about using them. But the thing is, you should understand what you are doing with these tools. Don't just copy paste and then run. Don't be that guy. That is not an engineer, that is not a developer. That's just a copywriter. So what the industry needs with this competitiveness is not copywriters, but engineers who solve problems. So those are the things that I have to share with you guys. And the other thing is, finally, summary is this. Now, I might have talked a lot, but don't be a victim of this imposter syndrome. I don't know this, I don't know Next.js, I don't know Vue, I don't know Next. So that mentality is the most important thing when it comes to mastering full stack. Because if you're with this mentality, every day you are a learner. There's so many stuff that I don't know about full stack development. I'm still learning day by day. So don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to share your ideas with the world. Don't be afraid to get into full stack development because you might not have the Git knowledge right now. You might not have the React knowledge right now, but that's okay because you know something that the other person doesn't know. That's how these things work. So don't be a victim of this imposter syndrome. So yeah, any questions?
Excuse me, Mr. Rukshan.
Yep.
Apologies for I've got a quick reminder for our participants. So if you have any questions, yes, you're free to drop them in the chat box, but you have an alternative as well. And that is to submit your questions via Slido by clicking the link in the chat or by scanning the QR code that will be displayed on the screen shortly. So yeah, now let's continue with the Q&A session. Over to you, Mr. Rukshan.
Yep, cool. So, um, okay, I have some questions in the chat. So the first one is, sorry for this question in an irrelevant time, but Spring versus Django. Which one you advise to specialize? I feel Django is very easy to use than Spring. Bring same things that Spring offers to the table from DRF, yet see all the institutes and companies promote Spring. Seems like it has more demand than Django. Why and what's your recommendation, please? Okay. So someone is asking about Django versus Spring. Now, honestly, I'm not the best guy to answer this question for this specific tooling because I don't have any masterful experience with either of them, Spring or Django. But what I can do, what can I say is there's always going to be this comparison. React versus Angular. Angular JS versus Angular. React versus Vue. Which one is better? Python versus Java. Which one is better? There's always going to be debate around uh, these these comparisons. So what I can tell you about these comparisons in general is, first, during the undergraduate years, I myself tried to have a bright or broader exposure to these technologies. I tried Java, I tried Spring Boot, I tried Python, whatever, everything that I could get my hands on, I tried. I didn't try to specialize in any of them during my university years because I needed to get the taste of every technology that I could have possibly gotten a taste of. Then, even now, I'm not a specialized person in any of these, but right now I'm using Python Fast API a lot, Next.js a lot, but I don't say I'm specializing in either of them. So it's better that you understand the or the concepts regarding this backend stuff. For example, ORMs or object relational mappers when it comes to database manipulations, or microservices architectures, and typing of the um, data structures, and also data manipulation, data transfer objects, like these things, annotators, um, design principles, OOP concepts. If you're familiar with these stuff, writing code is not the big thing. I said I have not used Spring Boot in a long time, but if you give me the task to write a Spring Boot application tomorrow, I will write it. How? Because I know the fundamentals. I know how to connect to a database. I know how to send the API request and handle responses. The code itself, the syntax, I can get from ChatGPT. I can get from Claude. And when the code is there, I know how to see whether this is the correct code or not. So I think that is more important than um, deciding which one is to specialize in, because I'm not the best person to answer that question. But that would be the answer that I have to give to that question. So just try to get the taste of both. And once you are graduating or once you're going to the actual industry, and once you are in the industry for some years, you'll be able to specialize. One reason people are using Spring Boot is because I think Java has been a long time. Java has been there for a long time. So people are generally considering it a stable language rather than Python, not because of this, the history only, but Java has been used for so many stuff. But Python, mainly it's used for AI and other stuff. And there are some low-level advantages of using Java. For example, performance issues are with Python. The code may be sometimes slower in Python because it's so high level. So yeah, those are some considerations that I can think of. Um, For the front end and back end, do we have Git repos, two Git repos? Yes. Generally, that's a best practice. You can have front end and back end two repositories. And even if you're going to the microservices architecture, you will have separate repositories for separate components of the backend. For example, you know, a newsletter feature can have a separate repository. A scheduling feature can have a separate repository. So backend components even can have separate repositories when it comes to the millions of users. Is Spring Boot a good framework to learn? Like, is it used in the industry much, or is it better to go with JS frameworks like Mernstack? I think Spring Boot is used in the industry and some variants of it as well in some large corporations in Sri Lanka as well. Yeah, Spring Boot is used generally. Are hackathons limited to undergraduate years? As I've seen many undergraduates, are there hackathons participate after 4 years of university, after graduating, I mean. Yes, there are hackathons after graduating. So there are mercantile hackathons. So when you're working with a team or a company, there are hackathons to participate as well. In interviews, what kind of skills do we need to demonstrate to be unique to the VV? Do we have code live during interviews? Can you give brief idea? Okay. So this is really cool, this question. When it comes to interviews, I'll tell you this one. So I have talked with some foreign connections, foreign networks, and some of my local networks as well. So what I can say from that is people are generally interested in what you can do rather than what it's on paper regarded to you. For example, if you have a lot of open source GitHub contributions, that will far outweigh the person with 4-point GPA for sure. Because potential clients or employers are interested in what you have actually done in the real world than what's on paper. So I think contribute more open source, go open source. That's really, really valuable if you're working with open source. I know universities have open source clubs, so join to them. They're really invaluable. And also keep an updated LinkedIn, keep an updated GitHub. Really, really underrated stuff, but those are really important. Some students, some undergraduates don't even have a profile picture on their LinkedIn. So that's really sad. So they're really important if you're going to seek some employment and also build up your career. And in enterprise app, how to deal with Git? Do we need separate Git repo backend front end? So you have a main repo, you need repo. Yeah. In enterprise applications, for one application, you might have 10s or 20 or 100 repositories, depending on the architecture of the application. So it's not going to be anyways one single repository anyways. So multiple repositories are there for one GitHub or one project. Let us know how the soft skills such as typing speed affect your career life. Typing speed, I think it's good to have a good typing speed, but that is not a deciding factor by any means when it comes to career, because now, your typing speed is outweighed anyways by Claude and ChatGPT, so you can give the requirement and it will spit out the code. So typing speed, I don't think it's a valuable soft skill per se, but it's good to have. Soft skills, I think one of the most important soft skills you have to have as an engineer or a full stack developer is communication. I have worked in teams where communication was lacking and they had to redo the whole user interface due to a communication mismatch. So they were not listening in the meeting maybe, and then they have done the whole user interface from mobile application, and that was not what the client wanted. They had to redo the whole thing because they were not listening in the meeting and they were not clarifying with the other people. So there is nothing called too much information when we are working on a team. You can ask questions. Is this what you wanted? I always do that. Whenever someone tell me to do some task, some programming task, I ask it. I ask to double check, verify. Is this what you mean? Because my time would be wasted if I think something in my mind and try to deliver that. So that's one soft skill, communication. How can we solve errors quickly while coding? So the first thing, think what works and where it stops working. So this is how I debug. So when I'm encountering with a bug, I go to the place where it works and it's not working from there on. So I know, okay, this is the place it's breaking. And then I have identified up to which point it is working. And then I use some debugging tools like, the debuggers within Android Studio, Visual Studio Code, or IntelliJ, whatever. There are debugging tools. So use the debugger. Don't write console logs everywhere. Just use the debugger and learn to use the debugging tools. Very important. Is it good practice with Copilot enabled in VS Code? I do it. Good practice by which metric? I don't know, but I use it. So GitHub Copilot is there for you to, do some mundane tasks very easily. It's not always giving you the correct code, but it's a help. So don't totally depend on it, but it's okay to use it for some tasks. What is the recommendation OS, Windows or Mac when it comes to uni or getting into development? I'm going to say Mac. So that's highly biased again. I'm not recommending Windows at all for development. It's either Linux or Mac for sure. Because when it comes to development, there are so many applications and tools that don't work with Windows. I mean, they work, but in order to get them working, it's a major hassle. So what I would recommend is Linux or Mac for sure. Um, I still can't figure out which. Okay, so yeah, how can we approach starting a project or solving a problem when we feel stuck? How can we approach starting a project or solving a problem when we feel stuck? I don't understand what is the perspective that you want me to answer that question. Feel stuck. I'm gonna generally answer that. You can write blogging. So, you know, there is something called build in public. So build in public means you can get the ideas from other people before you actually build the project. So that way you can have the feedback. So they will say, okay, that's a cool idea. You can build it, and we will give the reviews. We will give the feedback. Like that way, build in public is a concept that is popular these days, I think. So you can get the feedback from them, and you can just have so many other ideas as well. I still can't figure out what should do in my career, and I'm fearing about it. That's totally okay. I mean, if you're in university, you don't have to have the whole career. I mean, I even don't have that. So just try a bunch of things. Try DevOps, try UX, try front end, back end, everything. Try as much as you can within the university life. And then after you graduate and after you go into, let's say, 1 or 2 years of employment, you will feel, okay, this is what I want to do. And I hope, because I'm not in the industry for like 5 years, but I think that's something that I can say. Try different things, then you'll know what you want to do. I feel so stuck how to start any project and can't figure out how to start, and that fears about the future. Can't figure out how to start. Okay, I think what this person tries to say, it is actually the imposter syndrome, one version of it. So let's say you are thinking about starting a full stack developer, and then you're afraid if you share it on LinkedIn, people say, oh, this is too simple. Make a podi වැඩක් නෙවා, මේක ද share කරන්න LinkedIn. Nobody's gonna say tell like that. Not a good engineer or not a good developer that you should even care about. So what? Start simple. Even if it is a very, very simple portfolio project or a very simple static project, just code it, push it to GitHub as a public repository, share it on LinkedIn. You'll be amazed by the amount of people who love your journey rather than what you have actually done. If you say, okay, this is my first project, I learned HTML, I learned CSS, it's not much, but I did what I could, people will encourage you a lot, than so much than what you can expect. So I suggest you to do that. What skills should we focus on developing to stay relevant as AI content take over jobs, just in case? What skills? Okay. What skills should we focus? The ultimate thing as an engineer, we should be problem solvers. Like I said, should not be copywriters. We should not be copy pasters. You should not be people who are changing designs into code. We should be thinking how to solve problems, how to come up with solutions to problems. I mean, if you have that skill, I think AI is not going to replace you for a long time. because AI are struggling to find solutions to real world problems, but they can do repetitive mundane tasks very well, and they are getting better day by day. But this problem solving and complex things, if you have that knowledge, then it will be safe to say that you are safe in the job market, at least for the next 50 years or so. What type of hosting is suitable for a website developed with Python, HTML, CSS, and other frameworks? Hosting. So there is something called Coolify. I recently tried that. It's an open source project. Coolify, I suggest you to check that. So it's like a personal Vercel deployment, but you can pretty much deploy anything. So check out Vercel. And even with DigitalOcean, okay, one other thing. If you're a university student, there is something called GitHub Educational Pack. You can Google it, GitHub Educational Pack, and you get so much free stuff, free deployments, free emails, free web domains, and so many free stuff from the GitHub Education Pack. So use it. You can only use it during your university years. You will get GitHub Copilot Pro and so many other free stuff. Azure credits like $100 per year. So subscribe to that. And in that, there is a DigitalOcean subscription as well. So you can deploy it there as well. Is it better to use forums like Stack Overflow debugging rather than ChatGPT? Okay, yeah. I was meaning to tell this, but I forgot. So Stack Overflow, use it. So ChatGPT is already there. Don't worry. But Stack Overflow, you have to use as an engineer because this reason. When you ask a question, you get the skill of explaining your situation better. In that, you become a good communicator. There are so many times that I tried to use a Stack Overflow and ask a question, and as I was typing the question, I get the answer to myself. That has happened to me. So it will give you the ability to express yourself clearly, which is again a communication skill. So I suggest you use Stack Overflow, even though there are tools like ChatGPT. So, and the other thing is you can build up your career portfolio when you have the reputation in Stack Overflow as well. So yeah, that's something. Would it be better if you have our intern at the end of the uni rather than third year? I'm asking about you. So I've been a participant of this question. I think honestly, I'm I have mixed feelings about this, but when we go out to the university, when we go out from the university to do the internship, and we come back with that industry experience and we can continue on, we get a different perspective of what we were learning. That's a different feeling. But from the company side, they like to keep their employers or the interns throughout. I mean, without giving them back to the uni. So it's like 50-50. Honestly, I don't think I'm qualified enough to answer that. But my personal preference is the way it's there, going out in the third year and coming back, because that gives some perspective of some different perspective on what we've been learning after going to the industry and then coming back. As you mentioned, building in public, what platform can we use to seek guidance from mentors? One thing I have seen this, I'm sure there are different platforms to do this, but Twitter or X is a good platform to get feedback from people. And there is YC or Y Combinator. So they have their own forums as well. So if you have some good idea, you can post it there. And Reddit is also good. So people will tell you, okay, I have seen it like this. Why don't you do like this? Why don't you add this feature? Why do you think like this? Like that way, there are so many people who are willing to give you feedback and ideas. So I think Twitter, Reddit, Y Combinator, they might be good enough platforms. And LinkedIn also sometimes, maybe. Yeah, those are platforms, I guess. As I think, do projects and become familiar with various slangs and tools. Also show the knowledge in media such as GitHub, LinkedIn. Most important that participate in events and grabbing paper certificate. What do you think? GitHub. Yes, I mean paper certificates, they're all over the place right now. So just having a certificate doesn't mean anything anymore. But if you are with the certificate, it's of course some probability that you have done something good. But just having the certificate is not enough. Even the degree sometimes may not be enough. So you have to have some other stuff that you have done during your university years or after university years to have a strong portfolio. I think that would definitely add for you when you're going to the job interview. So one thing I can say is GitHub and LinkedIn, I know for a fact they are things that clients or potential HR people highly look at. So just have that idea. And there's another question, how to start freelancing. I mean, um, there is no clear cut cookie cutter way to start freelancing. Just, I've started with Upwork, but I've tried so many other platforms as well. But Upwork is a good place to start. But it's in the beginning, it's very difficult to get a project because you don't have any reputation first. But slowly during time, in the initial times, you might have to give huge discounts for the clients, like 50% discounts even. And then slowly build up your profile and then get to a place where you can demand yourself. I think that's the way to start. I hope that covers all the questions that we had in the chat and the Slido as well. Any other questions? I'm happy to answer for the next couple of minutes. Okay, so I just want to end like this. I shared the experience that I had to share with you guys. So I'm not a person who is like with 10 years of industry experience. I do have 10 years of coding experience, but not industry experience itself. But I shared with you guys what worked for me and what might work for you. So that's why I told in the starting slide as well. This is highly opinionated, highly biased. So get what you want from the speech. And I'm confident that if you follow the methods that I told, you might have a better chance of becoming a master full stack developer because it has to work. I mean, rather than focusing on the tooling and focusing on the fundamentals, it is a way that should work because you're not depending on anything else, but you're depending on the core fundamentals. When you're depending on those, you can be sure that you have a good chance in becoming a master at what you do. So I hope I was able to do that. And thanks a lot for listening. Okay, cool.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rukshan, for sharing your expertise with us today. Your insights have been incredibly valuable, and I'm pretty sure everyone here gained a wealth of knowledge from your session today. And also, a big thank you to our wonderful participants as well for your thoughtful questions and active participation. It's truly inspiring to see such enthusiasm and curiosity coming up from the audience. Now, on behalf of the IEEE student branch of the University of Moratuwa, we'd like to extend our gratitude towards our speaker for the day. We
Thank you
are
very much.
truly We are truly honored to have you here with us today, Mr. Rukshan. So, as a token of our appreciation, we would like to cordially invite Mr. Rukshan J. Senanayaka to accept the digital token of appreciation as a symbol of our gratitude. Your contributions tonight have been utterly priceless.
Thank you very much. And thanks, IEEE Student Branch, University of Moratuwa. It has been an honor and a privilege to have delivered and shared my experience with you guys.
So, moving on, we believe moments like these are worth saving and cherishing for the future. Therefore, before we part ways, let's capture a group photo. For that, I'd like to kindly request everyone to please turn your cameras on if you're feeling comfortable. So, if everyone's ready, 3, 2, 1, and smile. Thank you all. As we approach the end of our program today, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. We hope this session has been as enriching for you as it has been for us. And once again, a special thank you to Mr. Rukshan for sharing his expertise on behalf of the IEEE student branch of the University of Moratuwa. And that concludes the session today. A big thank you to everyone once again for contributing to making this event a success. And until we meet again with yet another insightful session, take care and good night. Thank you.